The alien princess met a human princess, and the war paused in silence. Explosions lit up the void as energy beams tore through hulls, and the echoes of destruction seemed to stretch forever. Above it all, Princess Arya guided her flagship, her hands steady on the controls, her mind sharper than any weapon. She was young, only 19, but already the leader of her people's fleet. Her silver hair fluttered in the gravity-simulated chambers, and her emerald eyes reflected the fires of distant planets. She had been trained for this her whole life, but nothing could fully prepare her for the weight of the war. The human fleet had been losing ground for weeks. Supplies ran low, and morale faltered with each planet lost to the alien invaders, yet Arya refused to falter. She had grown up hearing stories of courage, tales of humans rising against impossible odds, and she believed that even in this endless conflict, hope could survive. Today, however, the odds were against her. From the other side, Zelira observed the battlefield from her flagship, hovering above the chaos with an elegance that betrayed her deadly skill. The alien princess commanded her fleet with precision that was almost poetic. Her race had evolved in the harsh environments of their home planet, and their minds were sharp, trained to think 10 steps ahead in war and diplomacy alike. Zelira's deep purple eyes scanned the human ships, reading patterns in their movements as if the battle itself were a puzzle. She had fought many battles before, but something about this human princess intrigued her. The humans were stubborn, yes, but their courage was unusual. Rare, worth observing, the conflict escalated when Arya's flagship took a direct hit. The ship shuddered violently as alarms blared. Systems failed one by one, lights flickering and the hum of the engines faltering. She gritted her teeth, pressing buttons and issuing orders, but deep down, she knew escape was unlikely. Zelira watched silently, her curiosity overpowering her sense of duty. She could have finished the battle, annihilated the remaining human ships, and ended the fight in a single, devastating strike. But something held her back. A momentary hesitation, or perhaps a spark of recognition, passed through her mind. She saw not just an enemy, but a reflection of her own struggle. Leadership was lonely, filled with impossible decisions, and she felt the weight of that loneliness mirrored in the human girl's eyes. With a decision that shocked her own commanders, Zelira gave an order no one expected. The alien fleet slowed, energy weapons ceased fire, and a safe corridor opened through the battlefield. The human ships, confused at first, hesitated, then followed Arya's lead. She guided her crippled ship toward a nearby neutral planet, its surface green and vibrant, untouched by war. The ship shuddered violently during descent, but thanks to Zelira's unexpected mercy, it did not break apart. When the flagship finally landed, the ship's hull scorched but intact, Arya struggled to exit. Her legs were unsteady, her body aching from the damage sustained in battle, but determination pushed her forward. She had survived against all odds, and yet she felt no triumph. Only questions. Why had the alien princess spared her? What reason could she have to show mercy in a war that had cost so many lives? As she stumbled through the dense, colorful forest that spread across the planet, Arya became aware of a presence. She froze, her instincts screaming caution. From behind a cluster of bioluminescent plants, a figure emerged. Tall, regal, and unmistakably alien, Zelira stepped into view. Her skin shimmered with subtle hues that shifted in the light, her clothing flowing like liquid metal, her expression calm but unreadable. "You are safe," Zelira said in a voice that was firm yet gentle. "I could have destroyed you, but I did not." Arya studied her, wary but intrigued. "Why?" she asked. "Why spare me? Why stop the war even for a moment?" Zelira considered the question, her eyes thoughtful. "Because sometimes the future is clearer when violence pauses," she replied. "And sometimes it is worth seeing the enemy not as a target, but as a person." Arya felt a strange mix of surprise and caution. She had been trained to view aliens as enemies, beings who threatened her people, yet here was one showing mercy. She took a cautious step forward, noting the subtle grace in Zelira's movements. I don't understand," Arya admitted. "We have been fighting for so long, so many lives lost, and yet you stopped. Why me?" Zelira's gaze softened. "Because you are young, and yet you carry the weight of your people. You make decisions not out of fear, but out of hope. That is rare. And because I see potential for something greater than this war." The forest around them was alive with alien life. Strange creatures moved in the underbrush, their movements silent, their colors brilliant. Bioluminescent flowers opened and closed with a soft rhythm, and the air was thick with scents Arya had never known. Despite the danger, she felt a strange peace in this place, a momentary reprieve from the endless battle. They walked together slowly through the alien landscape. Neither spoke much at first, letting the silence fill the spaces between them. Words were unnecessary, the quiet conveyed more than language could. Arya found herself observing Zelira closely. The alien princess moved with confidence but not arrogance. There was wisdom in her stance, a calm that seemed to hold the storm of battle at bay. And yet there was also loneliness. Arya recognized it immediately. She, too, knew what it meant to bear responsibility that no one else could fully understand. Hours passed, and the sun began to set over the alien horizon, painting the sky with colors that did not exist on Earth. Or perhaps they did, but she had never seen them. Zelira led Arya to a cliff that overlooked a valley of glowing plants and flowing rivers that reflected the twilight. The view was breathtaking. "You see this," Zelira said quietly. "This is why we fight, not for conquest, not for power, but to protect what is precious." "Yet so often we forget." Arya nodded, her thoughts heavy. "I have been taught to win at any cost, but sometimes I wonder at what cost is victory worth it." Zelira looked at her, a faint smile forming. "A wise question. Perhaps one day you will teach your people to ask the same." They sat together on the cliff, watching the sun sink below the alien horizon. The wind carried strange scents and sounds, and for a moment the war seemed distant, almost unreal. In that silence, something formed between them, a fragile understanding, a connection that defied the boundaries of their peoples. "Do you ever feel alone in this?" Arya asked softly. "All the time," Zelira admitted. "But sometimes, when we meet someone who sees us, truly sees us, it reminds us that we are not as alone as we think." Arya's heart stirred at the words. She had never spoken to an enemy like this, never felt this sense of understanding from someone she was taught to fear. And yet she trusted Zelira in a way that surprised her. The first night passed with them talking, sharing fragments of their lives. Zelira spoke of her planet, of the long winters and the harsh lessons her people had learned. Arya shared stories of Earth, of human determination and creativity, of cities built from dreams and courage. Each word built a bridge between them, fragile but real. As the stars appeared, alien and human alike, they lay on the grass, silent once more. Neither needed to speak. The presence of the other was enough. For the first time in the long, exhausting war, there was no fear, no anger, no hatred. Only a quiet hope. Morning came with the promise of more danger, more challenges, but also with the knowledge that something extraordinary had begun. The war still raged beyond the planet, but for Arya and Zelira, a pause had occurred, not from treaties or demands, but from a simple act of understanding. They stood at the edge of the forest, preparing to face the world again, and yet neither felt fully alone. A connection had been forged that neither battle nor empire could erase. They had seen each other not as enemies, but as individuals, as leaders, as beings capable of change. And in that recognition, the seeds of something greater were planted. A hope that perhaps one day, war would be remembered not as a necessity, but as a lesson learned. And so, the first part of their story ended, not with victory or defeat, but with silence and understanding. In the quiet moments, the galaxy itself seemed to pause, if only for a moment, waiting to see what would come next. The next morning, the alien sun rose slowly over the lush forest, bathing the land in a soft golden glow. Arya stretched, feeling the aches from the previous battle, but her mind was awake with curiosity. She looked around at the strange landscape, the glowing plants, the rivers that shimmered with colors she could not name, and the air filled with unfamiliar scents that somehow calmed her. Zelira stood nearby, observing her with her usual composed grace, yet a faint smile touched her lips as she watched the human princess take in the beauty of the planet. "You've never seen anything like this before," Zelira said softly. "No," Arya admitted, "nothing like it. On Earth we have forests and rivers, but not like this. It feels alive, almost like it's breathing." Zelira nodded. "It is alive. This planet has learned to survive in ways humans might never imagine. Every creature, every plant, it adapts, grows, and protects itself." "There is a lesson here." Arya tilted her head, curious. "A lesson?" "Survival," Zelira replied. "And cooperation. Every part of this world works together to survive. Unlike the war, there is no needless destruction here. Everything has its purpose." You can learn much if you watch carefully. Arya considered the words. The war had been about power, about conquest, about victory at any cost. She had seen entire cities reduced to rubble, families torn apart, planets lost. And yet here she could feel a rhythm, a balance that did not rely on violence or fear. They began walking along the river, their footsteps soft on the alien soil. Zelira explained the flora and fauna, pointing out plants with healing properties and insects that could repair damaged metal if used carefully. Arya listened, fascinated but also thoughtful. She imagined the possibilities. Could these things help her people rebuild? Could knowledge from Zelira's world change the course of the war without more bloodshed? Do humans have anything like this? Zelira asked suddenly, looking at her. Arya smiled faintly. We have medicine, technology, but we fight each other too much to use it fully. Sometimes I wonder if we are too proud to learn from others. Zelira's eyes softened. Perhaps that is the difference between our worlds. Humans fight out of passion, aliens out of calculation, but both are capable of learning if they choose to. As they walked, Arya noticed the details that made the planet seem magical. Tiny lights floated in the air, almost like fireflies, but glowing with colors that shifted constantly. The plants emitted faint hums, harmonizing with the wind. Even the soil beneath their feet seemed alive, vibrating slightly, as if acknowledging their presence. It was strange, but it filled her with energy, as though the planet itself encouraged curiosity and understanding. Zelira led Arya to a small clearing, where a crystalline lake reflected the sky. The water was perfectly clear, and in its depths, Arya could see strange fish-like creatures gliding gracefully. Zelira knelt and cupped water in her hands, showing Arya how it could heal minor cuts and scratches almost instantly. Arya experimented, dipping a finger into the water and watching in amazement as a small scratch disappeared. "This is incredible," Arya whispered. "If we had this back home, so many lives could be saved." Zelira nodded. "Yes, but knowledge alone is not enough. You must also understand how to use it wisely. Power without understanding can destroy as easily as it can heal." Arya thought about her fleet, about the soldiers risking their lives every day. She realized that leadership was not just about strategy or courage. It was also about knowledge and responsibility. And here in this peaceful world, Zelira was teaching her lessons that went beyond war. They spent the day exploring, sharing small pieces of their lives. Zelira spoke of her childhood in the alien palace, of training in both mind and body, of lessons that taught patience, observation, and restraint. Arya shared memories of Earth, her family, her training as a commander, and her dreams for a future where humans did not have to fight constantly. "I never thought I could meet an enemy and learn from them," Arya admitted as they rested beside the lake. "You are young," Zelira replied. "It is easy to see the enemy as only an enemy. Wisdom comes from understanding them as more than that." A sudden noise interrupted their conversation. Both princesses tensed, moving instinctively to the shadows. A small alien creature, harmless in appearance, had stumbled from the trees. Its bright eyes reflected curiosity rather than aggression. They relaxed, and the tension faded, replaced by amusement. "You jump at everything," Zelira said softly, though there was no harshness in her voice. Arya laughed, a sound that felt strange in the alien forest. "I suppose I have to, or I wouldn't survive in this galaxy." Zelira smiled faintly. "Perhaps. But sometimes survival comes from courage, sometimes from patience. You must learn when to do each." As night fell, the two princesses sat by a small fire, created by a controlled alien energy crystal Zelira carried. The light danced across their faces, highlighting the differences in their appearances, yet also the similarities. Both carried the weight of leadership, both understood loss, and both were learning that connection could be more powerful than weapons. Arya looked at Zelira and asked, "Do you ever feel afraid? I mean of failing your people?" Zelira's gaze turned to the stars, thinking, "Every day, leadership is not about never feeling fear, it is about moving forward despite it. And sometimes the hardest battles are not against enemies, but against our own doubts." Arya nodded. She understood that feeling all too well. The human empire expected perfection, bravery, and wisdom from her at an age when most were still learning simple lessons. And yet she had survived, guided by hope and the desire to protect her people. The next days passed in a rhythm of learning and sharing. Zelira taught Arya about alien technology, how it could repair and sustain without destruction. She explained energy shields, sustainable resource management, and methods of communication that did not rely on force. Arya, in return, shared human strategies of negotiation, diplomacy, and creative problem-solving. They debated, laughed, and sometimes disagreed, but always with respect. Through these interactions, Arya began to see the futility of the war in a new light. She realized that the conflict was driven by fear and pride more than necessity. The aliens she faced were not monsters, just like the humans they fought were not heroes simply because they had courage. Both sides were capable of learning, of change, of peace. One afternoon, as they explored a valley filled with tall, crystalline trees, Arya stumbled upon a wounded alien soldier, clearly injured in the ongoing war. She froze, unsure what to do, but Zelira approached calmly. "Do not be afraid," Zelira said. "He is a soldier, yes, but he is also a life, and every life is worth saving." Together, they healed the soldier using the techniques Zelira had shown. The alien blinked at them, his voice weak but grateful. "You spared me," he said. "Why?" Zelira looked at Arya. "Because mercy is strength, because understanding is more powerful than hatred, and because the future is not written in blood alone." The soldier nodded, comprehension dawning in his eyes, and slowly left the valley, his steps steadier than before. Arya watched him go and realized that every action, no matter how small, could ripple through the universe, creating changes far beyond what she could see. That evening, the two princesses returned to the cliff where they had watched the sunset before. They were silent at first, letting the wind and the alien sounds fill the space between them. Finally, Arya spoke. "Zelira, I think I understand now. It's not enough to fight or to win. It's about what you leave behind, what you teach, what you inspire." Zelira looked at her, pride and sadness mixed in her gaze. "Exactly. And you, Arya, have the power to inspire more than soldiers or allies. You have the power to inspire change, to show your people that the universe is larger than conflict." Arya felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had always believed in courage, in fighting for what was right, but she now realized that courage could take many forms. Sometimes it was in battle, sometimes in diplomacy, and sometimes in simply choosing to understand an enemy rather than destroy them. As the alien night deepened, they sat together, the stars reflecting in the lake below them. The bond between them grew stronger, built on trust, respect, and shared dreams. Neither could predict what would happen when they returned to their fleets, but they knew one thing. The war might rage on, but a spark of hope had been lit, small but resilient. The days on the planet passed quickly, filled with lessons, laughter, and growing understanding. Arya began to sketch ideas for peaceful solutions, combining alien technology with human creativity. Zelira began to see that change was possible, that her people could learn to act with wisdom rather than fear. And all the while, the two princesses continued to learn from each other. They were different in many ways, yet the similarities ran deep. Both were leaders, both were dreamers, both were determined to shape the future. In their meetings, they found not only friendship but the beginnings of a plan, a vision of peace that could one day reach their empires. By the end of the second part of their journey, the world beyond the forest remained dangerous and unpredictable. The war still raged in distant systems, and the threat of discovery loomed over them constantly. Yet Arya and Zelira had found something stronger than fear: understanding, trust, and the courage to imagine a better future. And that was a force the galaxy had never seen before. The galaxy was vast, and the war stretched across countless systems. Yet even amid the chaos, whispers began to travel through the fleets. Soldiers, engineers, and scouts spoke quietly of the human princess and the alien princess who had met on a neutral planet, who had spoken in silence and walked together as if the war did not exist. At first, the rumors were dismissed as impossible, fantasies born of exhaustion and longing for hope. But as small acts of peace began to appear, the whispers grew louder. Arya and Zelira knew they could not remain isolated forever. Their people expected leaders to act decisively, not to explore friendship with enemies. Still, they had seen too much destruction to ignore what could be possible. They began crafting a plan, one that would not rely on force but on the courage of conviction. Their idea was simple yet revolutionary: show their people that enemies could act with mercy, that compassion could become a weapon stronger than any cannon. The first step was subtle. When Arya returned to her fleet, she used the alien technology Zelira had taught her to repair ships damaged in battle. Engineers marveled as broken hulls stitched themselves together, energy systems restored with precision they had never imagined. It seemed like a miracle, and soon soldiers began asking questions, not about the enemy, but about how such power could be used for healing rather than destruction. Meanwhile, Zelira returned to her own fleet with similar demonstrations. She used controlled energy shields to protect civilian settlements, saving lives without firing a single shot. Her people, trained to view humans as ruthless invaders, watched in disbelief. Slowly, they began to question the orders they had been given, realizing that the enemy might not be the monster they had been told to fear. Despite these small victories, the princesses knew the war had not ended. In secret, they continued their meetings on the neutral planet. Each time they saw each other, their connection grew stronger, and so did their understanding of the fragile bridge they were building. They spoke of strategies that could minimize bloodshed, of shared knowledge that could rebuild worlds, of ways to inspire their people without risking total disaster. One afternoon, as they walked through the alien forest, a distant explosion shook the trees. Both turned instinctively, weapons ready, only to see smoke rising from a nearby human colony. Arya's heart sank. Civilians, innocent lives were always the first to suffer. Without hesitation, she ran toward the colony, Zelira following closely. They arrived to see chaos. Fires burned and frightened humans scrambled for safety. But the aliens responsible for the attack were far behind the lines, unaware of the presence of the two princesses. Arya and Zelira worked together seamlessly, Arya directing human soldiers to evacuate, Zelira using alien technology to contain the fires and protect buildings. They moved with purpose, their combined efforts turning potential disaster into salvation. By the time the smoke cleared, many lives had been saved, and the colony remained mostly intact. Soldiers and civilians alike looked at the two princesses with awe. No one spoke at first. The sight of two enemies working together in perfect coordination was so unexpected it defied explanation. Finally, a young soldier whispered, "If they can do this, why can't the rest of us?" That simple question began to spread. Soldiers who had once obeyed orders without question now hesitated before launching attacks. Civilians, previously resigned to suffering, began organizing themselves to rebuild. Even minor acts of kindness, small gestures inspired by the princess's courage, began rippling across fleets and worlds. But not everyone was pleased. Within Zelira's empire, a radical faction saw the princess's actions as betrayal. They believed humans were untrustworthy, and that mercy would lead to weakness and defeat. One day, they set a trap, attempting to capture Arya during her visit to the neutral planet. Zelira sensed the danger almost immediately. She intercepted the attackers with precision, shielding Arya and forcing the faction to retreat. The close call strengthened their bond. Arya realized that Zelira's courage was not just in leading fleets, but in standing against her own people when necessary. Zelira saw in Arya a determination that refused to bow to fear, a willingness to challenge orders for the greater good. They had become partners in every sense, bound by trust and shared purpose. In the weeks that followed, their actions began creating a quiet revolution. Soldiers on both sides, inspired by stories of the princesses' cooperation, began questioning the morality of their orders. Small groups laid down weapons, choosing to protect civilians instead of attacking enemy settlements. Diplomats who had grown weary of endless negotiations found new courage, seeing that the leaders of both sides could act with empathy and vision. Arya and Zelira knew that the next step was risky. They would attempt to convene a meeting between representatives of both empires, not to fight, but to communicate. The location was neutral, the message simple. Peace could begin with understanding, not with surrender. They sent word secretly, using encrypted transmissions and trusted envoys. Many refused to attend, fearing betrayal or ambush, but a few courageous leaders agreed, drawn by the example of the princesses. The day of the meeting arrived. On a vast platform orbiting a neutral planet, the representatives gathered. They came armed with skepticism, suspicion, and centuries of conflict. The air was thick with tension, but the princesses stepped forward, standing side by side, human and alien alike. They did not speak immediately. Instead, they allowed silence to settle over the assembly, letting the weight of the moment sink in. The silence was powerful. No one had expected such a display. Two enemies, united not by force but by choice, showing that understanding could exist even in war. Slowly, leaders began to lower their weapons, to glance at one another to see the humanity or alien intelligence in the eyes of their counterparts. The moment stretched, long and tense, until finally one human diplomat spoke. This is unprecedented," he said quietly. "I never imagined I would see such a thing. Perhaps it is possible." A representative from Zelira's empire nodded slowly. "We have been taught that our enemies are monsters, but seeing your actions, your courage, perhaps we have been wrong." The princesses exchanged a glance. No words were needed. They had achieved the first step, breaking the cycle of fear and hatred. The war had paused, if only for a moment, in silence, but even as hope grew, danger lingered. Radical factions on both sides continued plotting, unwilling to accept change. Assassins, saboteurs, and spies moved in shadows, testing the resolve of the princesses and their allies. Each success brought new challenges, each act of mercy a potential threat. Yet the momentum was unstoppable. The soldiers who had witnessed acts of courage and empathy refused to return to blind obedience. Civilians who had once fled in fear now organized relief efforts, spreading the message that war did not have to define their lives. Arya and Zelira worked tirelessly, coordinating efforts across systems. They shared strategies, exchanged knowledge, and communicated through secure channels to avoid interception. Their relationship, built on trust and respect, became a model for others. Wherever they acted, lives were saved, communities rebuilt, and hope grew stronger. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, the princesses stood on the cliff of the neutral planet, watching twin suns set over alien mountains. The horizon glowed with soft light, reflecting the potential of a future that could exist if the war ended. "Do you think it will last?" Arya asked quietly. Zelira shook her head slightly. "Change is never easy. There will be those who resist, who fight to maintain fear and hatred, but even the smallest acts of courage can ripple outward. If we continue, if we lead by example, it can grow." Arya nodded, determination in her eyes. "Then we continue. No matter what happens, we continue. For our people, for the future, for hope." They stood together in silence, feeling the weight of their responsibility and the strength of their bond. The galaxy beyond remained dangerous and uncertain, but for the first time, there was a sense that change was possible. The war might rage on in distant systems, but something new had begun, a quiet revolution of understanding, empathy, and courage. The seeds planted by the princesses began to blossom in unexpected ways. Human engineers adapted alien technology to rebuild cities, while alien scientists experimented with human methods of cooperation and negotiation. Stories of the two princesses spread across fleets and planets, inspiring those who had long given up hope. Soldiers who once fought without question now questioned orders, seeking alternatives that minimized harm. Civilians found courage to speak, to organize, to protect one another. Through it all, Arya and Zelira continued to meet in secret, refining their plans and strengthening their connection. Every act of cooperation, every saved life, and every peaceful negotiation reinforced the lesson they were teaching the galaxy. Courage was not just about fighting. It was about choosing to act with wisdom, empathy, and vision. The third part of their story ended with a fragile but undeniable truth. The war had paused in silence, not because of treaties or threats, but because two leaders dared to act differently. They had shown that enemies could become allies, that trust could overcome suspicion, and that even the smallest acts of mercy could change the course of history. And as they looked out over the glowing forests and shining rivers of the neutral planet, Arya and Zelira knew that the greatest battles were yet to come, not in space, but in the hearts and minds of those who had never dared to hope. The galaxy was quieter now, but the echoes of war still lingered. Battles had slowed, and borders once guarded by fleets bristling with weapons were now patrolled by neutral observers. Human and alien citizens alike whispered about the impossible, two princesses from enemy empires standing together, guiding their people toward peace. Arya and Zelira had become symbols, beacons of hope in a universe long defined by conflict. Despite the cautious optimism, the work was far from over. Radicals on both sides still plotted in shadows, refusing to accept the lessons of mercy and cooperation. Entire fleets remained on alert, ready to strike at any sign of betrayal. But even amid this tension, the influence of the princesses was undeniable. Soldiers who had once followed orders without question now paused to consider the consequences of their actions. Citizens began rebuilding what had been destroyed. Often aided by technology and techniques the two princesses had introduced from each other's worlds. Arya walked through one such human settlement, marveling at the changes. Once this city had been scarred by bombs, its streets lined with rubble and despair. Now, alien technology repaired broken buildings, and humans and aliens worked side by side to clear debris and restore life. Children laughed as they ran through restored plazas, while engineers taught each other techniques to strengthen infrastructure. Even in small gestures, hope was growing. "Look at them," Zelira said softly, appearing at Arya's side. "They have begun to believe that life does not have to be defined by war." Arya smiled, feeling warmth in her chest. "It is amazing, and it's just the beginning." Zelira nodded. "Yes, but beginnings are the most important steps. Without them, nothing changes." The two princesses had become inseparable allies. Their strategy was no longer secret. It had grown into a movement. Fleets communicated cautiously at first, sharing resources and knowledge. Scientists and engineers collaborated across former enemy lines. Diplomats began convening in neutral zones, encouraged by the example of Arya and Zelira. Peace was fragile, but it was taking root, and the galaxy could feel it. However, progress required courage beyond the ordinary. One day, a message arrived that demanded immediate attention. A radical faction from Zelira's empire had captured a human colony on a distant planet, intending to use it as leverage to restart the war. The news spread quickly, sending ripples of fear and uncertainty through both empires. "We cannot let them succeed," Arya said firmly, her green eyes burning with resolve. "We cannot let fear undo everything we have accomplished." Zelira placed a hand on her shoulder. "We act, but carefully. We do not want to make the same mistakes as before. Precision, courage, and understanding, that is how we protect the innocent." Together, they devised a plan. Zelira would lead a strike to free the colony, while Arya coordinated evacuations and support. This time, it would not be a battle of destruction, but a mission of rescue. Their combined forces moved swiftly, striking only when necessary, disabling enemy systems without endangering civilians. When they arrived at the colony, the radical forces were surprised. They had expected fear and chaos, but instead they encountered cooperation and strategy. Arya directed human defenders while Zelira neutralized alien aggressors, moving with elegance and purpose. In less than a day, the colony was safe. Civilians were unharmed and the radicals were captured, their plans thwarted. As the dust settled, both princesses stood together in the central plaza. Civilians and soldiers gathered, looking at them with awe and gratitude. For the first time, many had seen that courage did not always mean fighting. It could mean leading, protecting, and inspiring. One elderly citizen approached, his eyes filled with tears. "I never thought I would live to see this," he said, "to see humans and aliens working together to see hope instead of war." Arya took a deep breath. "It is possible," she said softly, "and it will grow. Not because of weapons, but because of courage, understanding, and the choice to act differently." Zelira added, "Every life saved, every act of cooperation, every moment of empathy strengthens the galaxy. You all are proof that peace is stronger than fear." Word of their success spread across star systems like wildfire. Soldiers who had once fought without question began questioning orders, inspired by the courage of their leaders. Diplomats convened more frequently, seeking dialogue over battle. Civilians found hope, organizing communities and rebuilding cities. A silent revolution had begun, born from trust and courage rather than weapons. Despite their achievements, Arya and Zelira remained cautious. They knew that peace could not be achieved overnight. Radical factions still existed, and old grudges ran deep. Yet they also knew that the galaxy had changed irreversibly. The example they had set was undeniable. Enemies could become allies, understanding could overcome fear, and even the smallest acts of mercy could alter the course of history. One evening, the two princesses returned to the cliff on the neutral planet, the place where their journey had first begun. The twin suns were setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. The rivers below shimmered, reflecting the colors like molten glass. For a moment, everything was quiet, as if the galaxy itself paused to observe them. "We have done much," Arya said, her voice quiet, But there is still more to do, Zelira nodded. Yes, the work of peace is never finished, but what we have begun, it cannot be undone. People have seen another way. That is enough to keep hope alive. Arya looked at her friend, feeling gratitude and admiration. You taught me so much, not just about alien technology or strategy, but about courage, patience, and understanding. I could not have done this without you, Zelira smiled faintly. And you have shown me that even when the odds are impossible, humans can inspire change. We have both learned from each other, and together we have given our people a choice, to continue the cycle of war or to embrace hope. The stars began to appear, twinkling in the alien sky. Arya and Zelira sat together, the soft wind carrying scents and sounds from the forest below. The bond between them had grown beyond friendship. It was a partnership built on trust, respect, and shared vision. They knew that when they returned to their fleets, they would face challenges, skepticism, and perhaps even threats to their lives. But they also knew that the galaxy had glimpsed something new, something stronger than fear. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Peaceful initiatives began spreading throughout the galaxy. Human and alien scientists developed energy systems that healed planets and cities. Fleets patrolled borders not for war, but for protection. Children from different worlds played together in neutral zones, their laughter a reminder of what could be preserved. Slowly, the culture of fear and suspicion was replaced by one of curiosity, cooperation, and mutual respect. Leaders from both empires, inspired by the courage of the princesses, convened formal talks. This time, the meetings were not dominated by threats or ultimatums. They spoke cautiously but openly, realizing that the example of Arya and Zelira had shifted the balance. Trust, once impossible, began to grow. Agreements were made to cease attacks, share resources, and rebuild what had been destroyed. The galaxy was still fragile, but the first steps toward lasting peace had been taken. Arya and Zelira continued to guide these efforts. They traveled together, meeting with communities, advising leaders, and demonstrating through action that cooperation was stronger than conflict. Wherever they went, hope followed. Their names became known across star systems, not as warriors, but as leaders who had changed the course of history with courage, empathy, and vision. One evening, back on the neutral planet, the princesses watched the alien sunset together. The twin suns dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the forest and rivers. They did not speak immediately. Words were unnecessary. The quiet was filled with understanding, with the knowledge that what they had begun would continue to grow long after their presence. Arya finally spoke. Do you think one day the war will truly end? Zelira's eyes reflected the fading light. Yes, not because all differences disappear, but because people will choose understanding over fear. Courage is contagious and hope endures when it is nurtured. Arya nodded, feeling a deep sense of peace. Then we have done enough for now, but we will continue, won't we? Always, Zelira replied. As long as we are needed, we will guide the galaxy toward a future worth fighting for, not with weapons, but with understanding. The stars filled the sky, countless points of light that seemed to promise endless possibilities. The war had paused in silence, not because of treaties or fear, but because two leaders dared to act differently. They had shown their people that enemies could be allies, that trust could overcome suspicion, and that the smallest acts of courage could ripple through the galaxy, creating change where none had seemed possible. And as the twin suns disappeared, leaving the night sky glittering with stars, Arya and Zelira sat together, not as enemies, not as rulers bound by tradition, but as two individuals who had dared to imagine a better universe. The galaxy would remember them not for the battles they had fought, but for the hope they had inspired, for the peace they had begun, and for the courage to act differently in a world long defined by war. The universe was vast, the challenges many, but for the first time it felt possible. Peace could endure, hope could thrive. And the galaxy, once defined by conflict, was now learning the strength of understanding, the power of mercy, and the courage to choose a future brighter than any war could ever destroy. The alien princess met a human princess, and the war paused in silence,